Welcome to this episode of Dreamy History, where we will take a slow and soothing journey back in time to the development of bookkeeping in Renaissance Italy. Before we begin, I invite you to find a quiet space, dim the lights, and get comfortable under your blanket. Let the weight of your day slip away and take a moment to breathe deeply. Inhale slowly and exhale. Allow your body to relax into the surface beneath you. The world outside can fade into the background, leaving only the gentle rhythm of your breathing and the calming sound of my voice. Tonight, we will explore how the practice of bookkeeping evolved during a time of great change and innovation. But don't worry, there is no rush. Allow the facts and details to unfold slowly, like a comforting lullaby that soothes your mind and guides you gently toward rest. There is no need to focus too hard. Just let the rhythm of the story flow around you and allow yourself to drift into a peaceful sleep. As the first light of dawn began to stretch its fingers over the sleepy medieval village, the day started in a way that was almost imperceptible. There was no sudden jolt to the senses, no urgent rush to begin. Instead, the village awoke slowly, one quiet moment at a time. The air was cool and damp, carrying the faint, earthy scent of wet grass and the remains of dew on the ground. The silence of the morning was punctuated only by the occasional crow of a rooster, a sound that seemed as if it had been heard for centuries without change. In the homes, the morning unfolded at a gentle pace. The beds, rough and simple, were made with hands that had been awake for hours before the sun rose. A woman, perhaps a mother or a wife, would tend to the fire in the hearth. The fire was small and controlled, providing just enough heat to prepare a simple meal, like the crusty hard bread that would be eaten for breakfast. The thick smell of the bread baking in the hearth's heat would fill the room, its texture dense and coarse, far from the light, fluffy loaves we think of today. It was a food made to sustain, not to delight. Alongside the bread, a small portion of cheese or dried meat might be included, offering whatever nourishment could be found from last night's leftovers. The simplicity of it was a quiet testament to the humble routine of the villagers, who went about their days with the knowledge that their survival rested on consistency. The household's children, still groggy from sleep, might wander into the main room, their small feet padding softly on the floor. They were not immediately needed, not yet part of the adult world of work. But soon, they too would begin their day helping with simple tasks like sweeping or fetching water from the well. Their lives, though small and simple, were intertwined with the same rhythm of the day, a rhythm that didn't know the complexities of modern schedules or the rush of city life. Outside, the village began to hum with activity. The farmer would rise, stretching his limbs stiff from sleep, and make his way out to tend to his animals. The smell of hay, damp earth, and the occasional low moo of a cow would fill the air. The sound of clippers snipping at the wool of a sheep, or the quiet clop of a mule's hooves, was as familiar as the sunrise. The daily task of feeding, grooming, and caring for animals was a chore, certainly, but it was also a matter of survival. The animals provided not just companionship, but food, clothing, and labor. It was a cyclical process, repeated day after day, just as the sun would rise again tomorrow. As the village began to stir, the monotony of the morning routine set in, a quiet, familiar pattern that would repeat itself for the villagers. Nothing was rushed. No one was in a hurry. And as the fire burned low and the first meal of the day was eaten in silence, the village quietly prepared for the work that lay ahead. By mid-morning, the village's market square had come to life. The initial bustle was slow and steady, almost imperceptible to the casual observer. The merchants were just beginning to set up their stalls. Their voices were low but purposeful, calling out their wares in a nearly rhythmic cadence that resonated with the familiar hum of daily commerce. The scents of fruit, vegetables, spices, and meats filled the air, some of which had traveled long distances to get here. The merchant's voice might rise slightly when a passerby showed interest, but it never became frantic. No, the market had its own pace, its own rhythm. Buyers and sellers moved in a gentle flow, barely disturbing the overall calm of the scene. Each stall was a microcosm of the village's needs. The vegetable vendor had neatly stacked rows of cabbage, carrots, and root vegetables, their earthy smell mixing with the lighter scents of the fruit vendors, apples and pears. Nearby, the fishmonger set out his catch, freshly brought in from the nearby waters, their scales shimmering lightly under the morning sun. As the market opened, a few early customers, mostly women with baskets on their arms, strolled slowly from stall to stall, appraising the goods with measured gestures. The rhythm of their selections was slow, deliberate, and unfocused. They chose, bartered, and then moved on, repeating the same motions with each vendor. Bartering was the order of the day, but it was never rushed. A few coins exchanged hands, a bit of haggling over the price. It was a quiet, almost meditative practice. A merchant might lower the price for a loyal customer, and the customer would smile. A silent acknowledgement of the unspoken trust that had been built over time. If no immediate deal was struck, the buyers moved on, leaving behind a brief, lingering silence before the next one would approach. There was no sense of urgency, no need to hurry, just the slow rhythm of commerce as it had been practiced for generations. In the midst of all this, the scribes would quietly record the transactions. Their presence was subtle, like the hum of a quiet machine. As each transaction was made, the scribes moved from merchant to merchant, writing down the exchanges in their ledgers. The writing was slow and deliberate, done in beautiful flowing script with a quill dipped in ink. The ink would smear slightly on the page, leaving a faint trace of black, its scent mixing with the others in the air. Each record was an attempt to preserve the transactions for future reference. The merchant might keep their own ledger, but this written record was an important part of ensuring the community's larger system functioned smoothly. There were debts to track, goods to account for, and payments to be made. Each note was a small but important part of the puzzle that made up the economy of the village. And so, in the steady pace of their work, the scribes kept the village's records. In the quiet of the artisan's workshop, time moved slowly, marked only by the rhythmic sounds of work. The air was filled with the subtle scents of wood shavings, leather, and the occasional trace of freshly cut metal. The artisan's tools, a sharp chisel, a well-worn hammer, and a pair of sturdy scissors, were always within reach. Each tool an extension of the craftsman's skill. A carpenter might sit on a wooden stool, planing a piece of lumber with careful, measured strokes. Nearby, a cobbler worked the leather, pressing seams and stitching edges with practiced hands. The work was not frantic, nor was it quick. It was done at a steady pace, without rush, and it was the same pace at which the artisan kept his financial records. The artisan's shop was not just a place of labor, but of careful accounting. Every piece of material, whether it was wood, leather, or metal, was tallied in a small ledger. The ledger, often a simple bound book, with rough-hewn pages, was a constant companion to the artisan, a way to ensure that every piece of material was accounted for and that no transaction went unrecorded. Each page was a series of numbers: how many nails had been bought, how many yards of leather had been used, how many shoes had been completed and sold. It was not just a book of business, but a book of memory, where each entry was an attempt to preserve the work of the day. At the end of each day, the artisan would sit quietly by the fire, the flickering light casting shadows over the page of the ledger. He would make his notes in the same deliberate manner that he used to craft his goods, each line written with precision. For the artisan, this was as important as the work itself. If his numbers did not add up, if the record was not kept, the entire cycle of work, from the purchase of materials to the completion of the goods, would fall apart. Thus, the steady process of accounting was not just a matter of money, but of preserving the very integrity of the artisan's life's work. The act of accounting was methodical, almost meditative, with each entry serving as both a practical necessity and a reflection of the artisan's relationship to his craft. It was an intimate process, a quiet dialogue between the artisan and his ledger. Through this process, he ensured that every piece of leather and wood was properly used, and that every transaction, no matter how small, was accounted for. This practice, repeated day in and day out, was a cornerstone of the village's economy, albeit one that was often overlooked by those outside the walls of the workshop. It was only when the ledger was opened and the balance was checked that the full scope of the artisan's work became clear. In the Renaissance, scribes were an integral part of the process of bookkeeping. They were the quiet stewards of history, recording the events of daily life with their elegant script and painstaking care. They sat at their desks, which were often little more than simple wooden tables, cluttered with scrolls, inkpots, and parchment. The room was dimly lit, with only a single candle providing enough light to see by. The scent of ink was always in the air, thick and unmistakable, as the scribes dipped their quills into the ink and set to work. The act of writing was not quick. It was a slow, deliberate process, done with a calm, almost reverent attitude. The scribe's hand moved slowly across the page, ensuring that each letter was formed with care. There was no hurry in the process. The rhythm of the scribe's pen echoed in the room, its soft, scratching sound almost hypnotic. It was an act that required immense patience, for one small error could ruin an entire page. The scribe would begin again, rewriting the letter, the word, the line. Everything had to be perfect, and yet this quiet labor was essential. Without scribes, there would be no written record of the day's transactions. The scribes acted as the guardians of knowledge, ensuring that everything was recorded and preserved for future generations. The written word, in their hands, became a tool for organization, for preserving the past, and for ensuring that no important detail was lost to time. Their work was methodical, never rushed, and carried out with an almost obsessive attention to detail. Over time, these pages would become more than just records. They would become relics of a time long past, each line a piece of history. As the scribe worked, the world outside continued to turn. But inside the quiet room, there was a sense of timelessness. The sound of the quill was the heartbeat of the day, its steady rhythm marking the passage of time. As each new entry was added to the ever-growing record of transactions and events, it was a labor of love, a task done not for glory or reward, but for the simple, quiet need to to preserve the world in written form. In the quiet comfort of a home, a family would gather each evening to record their daily transactions. The ledger book, often a simple affair with blank pages bound together, was placed at the center of the table, where the family members would sit around it. The mother, having tended to the fire and the food, would gather the receipts from the day's purchases. The father, who had worked outside in the fields or as a craftsman, would note down his earnings. The children, still young and learning, might be tasked with drawing simple lines or tally marks to help in the process. This was a family affair, a slow, steady ritual that brought the family together at the close of each day. The ledger was not just a book of numbers. It was a record of their lives. Every item, every expense, was meticulously written down, not with the hope of gaining wealth or fame, but to simply ensure that the family could survive the next day. There was no extravagance in the ledger, no unnecessary purchases or luxuries. It was a book of needs, of the things that were required to keep life moving forward. As the family worked, their voices were low, and the room was filled with a quiet sense of purpose. The rhythm of the task, repeated every evening, became a steady beat in their lives, marking the passage of time in a way that was both intimate and practical. There was no rush, no urgency, just the quiet task of accounting for the day's needs. Luca Pacioli, a name that would become synonymous with the art of bookkeeping. His early life was modest, as was the life of many during the Renaissance. Little is known about his childhood, but what is certain is that it was steeped in the daily routine of the time, a routine that was grounded in slow, methodical tasks. He likely spent much of his early years in the presence of humble tradespeople, farmers, and artisans, all of whom relied on some form of record-keeping for their day-to-day transactions. This quiet, meticulous world would set the foundation for Pacioli's later work. Pacioli's education was somewhat unconventional. He did not attend a formal school as we would understand it today, but instead received his learning through an apprenticeship model, as was common for the time. His early years were spent in Perugia, where he studied under some of the most respected scholars of the era. The pace of his studies was methodical and deliberate, guided by the hands of tutors and masters who had their own deep respect for precision and clarity in knowledge. It was here, within the slow grind of study, that Pacioli began to develop an interest in mathematics, a field that would become his lifelong pursuit. The Renaissance was a time when mathematical ideas were beginning to be revisited and expanded upon, especially with the rediscovery of ancient Greek texts. Pacioli was keenly aware of this intellectual awakening and immersed himself in the study of numbers, proportions, and geometry. His curiosity grew beyond the theoretical, and he started to apply mathematical principles to practical problems, particularly in the realm of commerce. By the time he moved to Venice in the 1480s, he had already established himself as a scholar who was more interested in the applied aspects of mathematics than in the abstract. While Pacioli was deeply immersed in his academic work, the world around him continued its slow, steady march toward a more organized and financially connected society. The rhythms of daily life in Venice, with its intricate web of trade, commerce, and banking, created a fertile ground for the application of mathematical principles. Pacioli's path, though quiet and unobtrusive, was already leading him toward the emerging world of Renaissance bookkeeping. As a young man, Pacioli traveled extensively, seeking to deepen his understanding of both mathematics and its applications. His travels took him from Perugia to Florence, Rome, and eventually Venice, where he came into contact with some of the greatest minds of the era. The world during the Renaissance was one of intellectual ferment, but it was also marked by an almost oppressive pace of life. The cities he visited were busy, their streets filled with the sounds of merchants, scholars, and artists. Yet, even in this environment, there was a quiet sense of order, a slow, steady undercurrent of everyday routines that did not rush forward but moved steadily, like the flow of water in a canal. In these bustling cities, Pacioli encountered the work of many other scholars. He witnessed firsthand how merchants kept records of their daily transactions, how they tracked profits, losses, and the flow of goods across Italy and beyond. These observations deeply influenced Pacioli's thinking. He realized that the world of finance, while growing ever more complex, lacked a structured system for keeping track of transactions in a way that was reliable and accurate. This realization led Pacioli to devote much of his intellectual energy to developing a more efficient and systematic way of recording financial transactions. He understood that the growing complexity of Venetian trade, with its multiple partners, debts, and credits, required a method of accounting that could account for all these moving parts. Pacioli's approach to this problem was grounded in his mathematical training, which emphasized balance, symmetry, and clarity. It was through this lens that he began to develop the system that would become the foundation of modern bookkeeping, double-entry bookkeeping. The quiet, deliberate pace of his studies was evident in the long hours he spent poring over ancient texts and manuscripts. His dedication was not flashy or dramatic. It was, instead, slow and methodical. Each step he took was an effort to build something that could withstand the tests of time, a system that would become an integral part of the world's growing financial infrastructure. In 1494, Pacioli published his most famous work, Summa de Arithmetica, Geometria, Proportioni et Proportionalita. In this monumental text, Pacioli included a detailed description of the double-entry bookkeeping system, a method that would forever change the way financial transactions were recorded. His explanation was thorough and precise, carefully walking through the steps involved in recording both credits and debits for each transaction. The idea was simple, yet revolutionary. For every transaction, there must be an equal and opposite entry in the books, ensuring that the accounts remained balanced. This concept of double-entry bookkeeping was not a sudden or dramatic leap in accounting practices. It was a natural progression from the earlier methods of keeping records, but it offered a more structured and reliable way of tracking finances. The method required the meticulous recording of both sides of a transaction, the money coming in and the money going out. This was not a method that could be rushed. It was slow and deliberate, requiring patience and attention to detail. Each entry had to be checked and rechecked to ensure that the accounts balanced perfectly. For Pacioli, this was the key to ensuring that the complexities of Renaissance commerce could be accurately tracked and managed. The text was published in Venice, where the city's merchants and bankers were already familiar with the need for accurate financial records. Pacioli's work, however, provided them with a systematic and logical approach to achieving that accuracy. His influence spread quickly, especially as the ideas in his book were adopted by some of the most prominent merchants and bankers of the time. But the spread of these ideas was not immediate. It took time for the practice to be fully understood and adopted. The rhythm of change in this period was slow, and while Pacioli's book was a key piece in the development of modern accounting, it was not until later that double-entry bookkeeping became universally accepted. For Pacioli, the publication of Summa de Arithmetica marked the culmination of years of quiet labor and intellectual pursuit. It was the result of a life spent in the slow accumulation of knowledge, and it would have far-reaching consequences for the future of finance. Venice was, at the time of Pacioli's work, one of the most important trading centers in the world. The city's merchants were involved in a vast network of trade that spanned the Mediterranean and beyond. They dealt in everything from spices and silk to grain and timber. The scale of the trade was enormous, and with it came the need for a more structured way of managing the flow of goods, credits, and debts. This is where Pacioli's double-entry system found its most immediate application. Venetian merchants were quick to recognize the utility of Pacioli's system. The ability to keep track of both incoming and outgoing transactions with such precision helped them manage their businesses more efficiently. Merchants could now more easily track their profits and losses, calculate their debts, and ensure that they were paid on time. The bookkeeping process, once a haphazard affair filled with scribbled notes and unclear records, became more organized and reliable. Venice, with its complex system of canals, warehouses, and marketplaces, began to see the benefits of Pacioli's system. The city's merchants were not the only ones to adopt double-entry bookkeeping. The bankers, too, found it invaluable. As the city's financial institutions grew, they required a more systematic way of tracking loans, interest payments, and deposits. Double-entry bookkeeping provided the framework for this. It allowed them to manage their increasingly complex transactions with greater accuracy and confidence. Slowly, this method spread across other regions of Italy and eventually to the rest of Europe. The impact of double-entry bookkeeping on Venice's trade was profound, but it was also gradual. The method was not universally adopted overnight. Instead, it became an integral part of Venetian commerce over many years, evolving and refining itself along the way. The slow, steady progress of adoption was typical of the Renaissance, a time of intellectual change that unfolded at its own pace. Although Pacioli's double-entry system was initially embraced by the merchants of Venice, its full impact took time to be realized. The system spread gradually across Italy, first to Florence, then to Milan, and eventually to the rest of Europe. Pacioli's influence was not limited to the commercial world. His work also found a place in the academic community, where it was studied and discussed by scholars and mathematicians. The spread of double-entry bookkeeping was not a dramatic event. It was a slow, methodical process. As more people learned about Pacioli's ideas, they began to adopt and adapt them to their own needs. Merchants, bankers, and even governments saw the value in having a clear, reliable system for tracking financial transactions. By the end of the Renaissance, the principles of double-entry bookkeeping were firmly established across Europe. Despite this, Pacioli never lived to see the full extent of his influence. He passed away in 1517, before his ideas had been universally adopted. However, his work laid the foundation for the modern accounting systems that would follow. The method of recording both debits and credits became a cornerstone of modern financial systems, and it continues to be used to this day. The quiet spread of Pacioli's ideas, though slow, was steady. Each ledger that was opened, each account that was balanced, was a silent tribute to the work that he had done. It was a testament to the enduring power of his method, a method that would quietly shape the financial world for centuries to come. In Renaissance Italy, the role of the accountant was essential but often overlooked. These men, skilled in mathematics and finance, were tasked with maintaining the intricate web of financial transactions that supported the rapidly expanding commercial and banking sectors. Unlike the more visible merchants and traders, accountants worked in relative obscurity, often hidden away in dimly lit offices or behind the closed doors of wealthy homes. Yet their work was crucial to the functioning of the economy. Their days were spent balancing ledgers, ensuring that every transaction, no matter how small, was carefully recorded. The accountant's tools were simple but essential: a quill, ink, and parchment. These were the instruments of their trade, the tools that allowed them to meticulously track each debit and credit. The accountant's role was more than just writing down numbers. It was about maintaining balance, ensuring that each entry on the ledger had its counterpart, that every credit was matched by a debit. The act of balancing the books was a slow, deliberate process. Each number had to be double-checked, each transaction reviewed, as the accountant sought to maintain order in a world that was becoming increasingly complex. The hours spent in the accountant's office were long and monotonous, marked only by the scratch of the quill and the soft murmur of calculations. Every day, the accountant would pore over the same records, checking the same figures over and over again. There was no rush, no excitement. The work was steady and relentless. It was the perfect reflection of the Renaissance itself, a period of slow, incremental progress, where every detail mattered and no step could be skipped. For the accountant, there was no end to the work. Every transaction had to be recorded, every account balanced. The weight of responsibility was heavy, but the work was carried out with quiet dedication, as the accountant ensured that nothing was left to chance. The office itself was a place of solitude, a refuge from the noisy streets and bustling markets outside. The flickering candlelight illuminated the accountant's work, casting long shadows on the walls. The air was thick with the scent of ink and paper, and the only sounds were the soft rustling of parchment and the rhythmic scratch of the quill on the page. Time seemed to slow within these walls, as the accountant worked tirelessly to keep the financial world in balance. It was a quiet, almost meditative process, one that, though essential, was rarely acknowledged by those who benefited from the fruits of the accountant's labor. Venice, one of the most powerful and wealthy cities of the Renaissance, had a financial system that was remarkably advanced for its time. The city's merchants, bankers, and traders relied on meticulous accounting to track the flow of goods, money, and resources. Venetian ledgers, some of the most complex of their time, were used to document every aspect of this trade. These ledgers were filled with columns of numbers, carefully arranged and recorded by scribes and accountants. Each ledger entry contained a detailed description of the transaction, the parties involved, and the amount of money exchanged. What made Venetian ledgers so complex was the sheer volume of transactions. Goods came in from all corners of the world: spices from the East, wool from England, silks from China. The merchants of Venice traded not only in tangible goods, but in credits, loans, and promises. The flow of money was constant, and keeping track of all these transactions required an extraordinary level of detail and precision. The ledgers contained not only financial data, but information about the movement of goods, the quantities traded, and the prices agreed upon. These records were not just a reflection of the present. They were a prediction of future gains and losses, an attempt to control an ever-shifting economy. Each entry was written with painstaking care, the scribe ensuring that the information was recorded accurately and that the ledger remained in balance. The work was repetitive and time-consuming, Every number had to be double-checked, every transaction verified. The amount of money recorded was not just about tracking profits. It was about maintaining the stability of the entire financial system. If a single figure was off, if a ledger was out of balance, it could have disastrous consequences. The merchants of Venice knew this well, and so they relied on accountants to ensure that the ledgers were kept in perfect order. The complexity of these ledgers grew as Venice's financial empire expanded. What started as simple records of trade became intricate webs of financial relationships, with loans, debts, and interest payments all being tracked in great detail. The Venetian merchants had become masters of the financial system, and the ledgers they maintained were a testament to their skill and sophistication. As the Renaissance progressed, these accounting practices would spread across Europe, influencing the development of modern finance. The Medici family, one of the most powerful dynasties of the Renaissance, played a pivotal role in the development of accounting systems during this period. As bankers to kings, popes, and princes, the Medici were at the center of a vast network of financial transactions that spanned Europe. Their banking empire relied heavily on meticulous bookkeeping to ensure that their business operations ran smoothly. The Medici kept detailed records of every transaction, every loan, and every payment made. These records were not just a reflection of their financial dealings. They were a reflection of the family's power and influence. The Medici's approach to bookkeeping was systematic and methodical. They employed skilled accountants who were trained in the intricacies of double-entry bookkeeping. These accountants used the same principles that Luca Pacioli had described, ensuring that every credit and debit was recorded with precision. The Medici also developed their own variations of the double-entry system, making it more efficient and better suited to their specific needs. The Medici's banking empire was vast, and their ledgers contained a wealth of information, not just about money, but about the complex web of relationships that sustained their wealth. The influence of the Medici family on accounting practices cannot be overstated. Their financial empire helped to shape the modern banking system, and their approach to bookkeeping became the standard for many European merchants and bankers. The Medici were not only patrons of the arts and culture, but also pioneers in the development of financial systems that would endure for centuries. Their legacy, in many ways, was built on their ability to manage money and maintain control over a growing financial network. While the Medici were known for their wealth and power, their financial practices were grounded in the slow, meticulous work of their accountants. The Medici were not just building an empire of gold. They were building an empire of order, precision, and stability. And the accountants who worked for them were the unsung heroes of that empire. One of the most important innovations in Renaissance bookkeeping was the development of the T account, which would later become a cornerstone of modern accounting. The T account is a simple, yet highly effective method for tracking both debits and credits. The design is, as the name suggests, shaped like the letter T. On the left side, the debit entries are recorded. On the right side, the credits. This simple structure allows accountants to keep track of the flow of money in and out of accounts, ensuring that every transaction is balanced. The creation of the T account was not a dramatic event. It was a gradual development that took place over time. Accountants in Renaissance Italy began to realize the benefits of this simple method for recording transactions. It allowed them to keep their books in better order and to quickly identify any discrepancies between their debits and credits. The T account became the backbone of Renaissance accounting, providing a clear and straightforward way to record financial information. As merchants, bankers, and accountants adopted the T-account system, it became more refined, eventually evolving into the standardized method used in modern accounting today. The T account, in its simplicity, offered a sense of clarity that was absent in earlier accounting systems. It was a tool that helped bring order to a chaotic financial world. With the T account, accountants could more easily track the flow of money, and merchants could ensure that their financial records were accurate. The method was so effective that it was soon adopted across Italy and beyond, becoming the standard for bookkeeping in the Renaissance period. The accounting records of Renaissance Italy, particularly those from Venice and Florence, have been carefully preserved over the centuries. These records offer a rare glimpse into the financial world of the past and provide invaluable insights into the trade, commerce, and economic systems that existed during the Renaissance. The preservation of these records was not a simple task. Many of the ledgers and account books were stored in less than ideal conditions, subject to the ravages of time, humidity, and decay. Yet, despite these challenges, many of these records have survived, carefully preserved in archives and libraries around the world. The survival of these accounting records is a testament to their importance. They were not just simple business records. They were tools that helped shape the financial systems of the modern world. The information contained within these ledgers is still being studied by historians and economists today, who use them to understand the economic practices of the Renaissance and to trace the development of modern finance. These records are more than just numbers. They are the stories of individuals and families, of merchants and bankers who lived and worked in a world that was very different from our own. The slow pace of their lives, their quiet dedication to their work, is reflected in the meticulous entries in their ledgers. These books, once used to track the flow of money and goods, are now relics of a bygone era, but they continue to provide valuable lessons about the importance of careful record-keeping and the steady, deliberate nature of the financial world. In the grand homes of Renaissance Italy, the aristocracy awoke not to the crowing of roosters, but to a more measured, deliberate start to the day. As the first rays of the sun filtered through large windows, adorned with heavy curtains, the slow sounds of morning began. Servants moved about the halls with quiet efficiency, preparing the day's first meal. The smell of fresh bread, baked with care in the kitchen, mingled with the soft scent of coffee or spiced wine that might be served to the family. These were luxuries unknown to the common folk, yet the pace of the morning was not hurried. There was no urgency in these early hours, only the slow, predictable rhythm of life in a wealthy household. The noble family, too, began their day with deliberate calm. The head of the household, a man of middle age, perhaps, would sit at the long wooden table, his attire elegant but not ostentatious. His morning was not marked by labor or hard work, but by contemplation and planning. He might read from one of the many books that lined his study, the pages rustling softly under his hands as he turned them slowly. The rhythm of his day mirrored that of his household, measured, unhurried, and filled with an almost meditative repetition. The family's servants moved in and out of the room, setting plates with precision. The aristocrat's wife, elegant and composed, might offer a word or two to her children, her voice soft and unhurried. The children, who were not yet old enough to participate in the business of the household, would be given simple tasks like helping to set the table or fetching the morning's letters. Their movements, too, were slow, deliberate. Their lives in the early hours of the day were small, repetitive tasks, much like those of the servants around them. This aristocratic routine was not simply about indulgence, but about maintaining an air of calm and control over the household. Everything had its place, and the pace of the morning was a reflection of this order. The aristocrat's life was one of quiet command, where each movement was deliberate and each action planned. The work of the day was set before him, but it was not urgent. It would unfold at a pace dictated by his own will, a stark contrast to the chaotic energy of the merchant classes or the working peasants. The management of estates in Renaissance Italy was a slow, meticulous process that consumed much of the aristocrats' time. Estates were large and sprawling, encompassing not only grand villas, but also vast agricultural holdings, forests, and even small villages. The nobility did not manage these lands themselves, but rather relied on a team of stewards, clerks, and accountants to oversee the daily operations. Each steward had specific responsibilities. Some managed the workers who tilled the fields, while others oversaw the harvesting of crops or the care of livestock. The complexity of managing such vast estates required an organized system of record-keeping, a system that relied heavily on the principles of double-entry bookkeeping. Each year, the steward would send a detailed account of the estate's financial standing to the master of the house. These accounts were slow and methodical, filled with the names of workers, the quantities of grain harvested, the costs of repairs to buildings, and the income generated from rents. The ledger would be filled with columns of numbers, each entry painstakingly recorded to ensure that the estate's finances remained balanced. These ledgers were reviewed regularly, but there was no rush in the process. The aristocrat would often review the records at his leisure, taking his time to study the numbers and make adjustments where necessary. The pace of this work was deliberate, reflective, a quiet activity that unfolded over time. The aristocrat's financial management extended beyond the estate itself. The noble family might also hold investments in businesses or banks, which required careful monitoring. The accounting for these investments was equally slow, marked by careful attention to detail. Each transaction was carefully recorded in ledgers, and the family's accountants ensured that each financial relationship was maintained and that all debts and credits were properly tracked. This routine of financial management was not a hurried one. The work was done at a calm, steady pace, with no sense of urgency. The nobility knew that their wealth was not a fleeting thing, but a legacy to be preserved and managed over generations. And so, they entrusted their financial affairs to those who could maintain this slow, methodical approach, knowing that their wealth, like the land they owned, would continue to provide for them for years to come. As the Renaissance cities of Italy grew in size and complexity, so too did the need for a well-organized bureaucracy to manage the increasing flow of business and governance. Government officials spent their days buried in paperwork, sorting through the many records that were kept to track taxes, expenditures, and the general administration of the city. Unlike the merchant or artisan, whose work was visible and tangible, the bureaucrat's work was behind the scenes, conducted in quiet, dimly lit offices. The bureaucrats of Venice, Florence, and Rome were responsible for ensuring that everything ran smoothly. They worked long hours in offices filled with piles of paper, their desks covered in records and ledgers. Every day, they would review and update these documents, checking the records for accuracy. The pace of their work was methodical, marked by slow, deliberate movements as they shuffled papers, wrote down new entries, and signed off on completed reports. The office was silent, save for the scratching of pens on parchment and the occasional murmur of conversation between clerks. Time seemed to pass slowly, with each document requiring careful attention. There was no sense of urgency, only a steady, quiet rhythm as the bureaucrats ensured that the city's financial matters were in order. This was the work of administration, a behind-the-scenes effort to keep the wheels of society turning. The bureaucrats themselves were not typically part of the public life of the city. They were not the wealthy merchants or the artistic luminaries of the Renaissance, but instead worked quietly in the shadows, keeping the records that allowed the city to function. They were highly trained in the art of bookkeeping, with a deep understanding of how to track income, expenses, and debts. Their work was crucial to the success of the city, yet it was often thankless and invisible. In the grand banking offices of Venice and Florence, the pace of life was measured, and the atmosphere was one of quiet sophistication. The banks, run by powerful families like the Medici, were the heart of Renaissance commerce. These banks were the lifeblood of the economy, providing loans, accepting deposits, and facilitating the flow of capital throughout Europe. The work of the bankers was precise and deliberate, requiring careful attention to the smallest detail. Bankers did not rush their work. They moved through their day with a sense of calm, ensuring that every financial transaction was properly documented and that the accounts remained balanced. The banking system relied heavily on the principles of double-entry bookkeeping, and the bankers' offices were filled with ledgers and scrolls, each entry meticulously recorded. Bankers, much like the accountants, spent hours each day reviewing these records, checking the balance of accounts, and ensuring that no discrepancy went unnoticed. The work of the banking elite was not about speed or urgency. It was about accuracy and trust. The Medici, for example, loaned vast sums of money to kings, popes, and merchants, and their success depended on their ability to manage these transactions with precision. The bankers relied on a team of skilled accountants and scribes to maintain their financial records, but they, too, were involved in the slow process of reviewing and approving the entries. The banking elite of Renaissance Italy was an exclusive group, but their work was grounded in the slow, methodical pace of accounting. They were not just wealthy men. They were stewards of vast financial empires, and their success was based on their ability to manage money with quiet precision. As the day drew to a close, in the elegant homes, quiet offices, and bustling banks of Renaissance Italy, the legacy of bookkeeping began to take shape. The slow, methodical work of the accountants, scribes, and bankers would go on to influence the development of modern financial systems. What began as a simple system to track transactions had evolved into a sophisticated method for managing wealth, debts, and assets. The legacy of the Renaissance's quiet accounting revolution would spread across Europe and eventually the world. For those who had spent their days in the silent world of ledgers and books, the work was not glamorous. It was not filled with the excitement of trade or the thrill of conquest. It was slow and deliberate, marked by the rhythm of writing, checking, and balancing. Yet this work would lay the foundation for the financial systems that we rely on today. As the sun set on Renaissance Italy, the scribes and accountants put down their quills. The bankers closed their ledgers, and the noble families retired for the evening. But the work they had done would live on, quietly shaping the future of finance. In the end, it was the steady, unhurried rhythm of their work that ensured their success. As we bring this journey through Renaissance Italy to a close, we can reflect on the quiet importance of bookkeeping in shaping the world as we know it. What once began as a simple system to record daily transactions has become the foundation of modern finance. The gentle hum of scribes, the scratching of quills on parchment, and the steady rhythm of daily life. These things have given us the systems that now govern the global economy. And as you lay here, with the weight of the world fading into the background, remember how far we've come. Take a moment to feel the warmth of your blanket around you, the peacefulness of this moment. The hustle of the Renaissance is a distant memory, and yet the legacy of that time lives on in the very financial systems we rely on today. As you let go of the thoughts of the past, allow yourself to drift peacefully into sleep, knowing that history's quiet echoes continue to shape our lives in subtle, unseen ways. Good night.